Hello everybody and welcome to a new Python video. In this video we're going to be discussing three very simple to learn, beginner friendly mini Python projects. These three projects are going to teach you three simple things. Generating a random number, user input, and creating basic equations in Python. We're going to be creating three projects. The first one is going to be a word counter, the second one is going to be a number guessing game, and the third one is going to be a temperature converter from Fahrenheit to Celsius or converse. So let's dive into our very first one, which is going to be the word counter. Okay, so let's get started. We're going to create a new variable, and this variable is going to be equal to user input. So how we do this is we're going to say input, and now we can type something in. So that is going to be asking the user for a string. So when we do an input, you need to type it in the terminal. So I'm going to ask the user, please enter a string. Oops, okay. And then I give a colon and a space. So the user is going to answer in the terminal right here like this. And then we count the words of that. Okay, so now we have a string that's going to be equal to the user's input, which is this. Now we need to count the number of words in that string. First, let's create a word counter variable. So word count is going to be equal to 0. And this is the initialization of the variable word count. Now we can create a cool for loop. For character in string. So this for loop right here, or the statement I just created, is going to loop through every character in the string. We could call this I, and it would loop through every character in the string, but the character would go by the name I. So the string letter would be held in the variable I. I'm going to call it char because it's just easier to understand that way. Now this is some very simple logic. If the char is double equal to a string and space, colon. So what's going to happen here is we have our character, so we're going in iteration 0. We have our first letter, and if the answer was hi, how are you? Our first letter would be H. So we're going to check if H is equal to space, because essentially we're counting for spaces, and for each space we're adding word count, because words are divided by spaces. Okay, so now we're checking for a space, and if there's no space, we're going to do nothing. But if there is a space, then we can add word count. We can add 1 to it. So this statement right here, plus equals to, it's the same thing if we say word count is equal to word count plus 1. We're just adding 1 to it. This is a shorter way and an easier way to do it. Okay, so that's it. For every character, we're going to check if the character is equal to space. So you can see that's a space right there. These are spaces. And for each space, we're going to add we're going to add to word count. Now in the end, we're going to count this, and then we're going to have another word here, but there is no space. So I'm going to leave this like this, and then we'll run it and see what the problem is. But in the end, we need to print out. So this is the print statement. You can print out in the terminal. So again, same place you input, it's in the terminal. Now we're printing in the terminal. So now we need to tell them, hey, these are how many words you have. So here are the number of words in your string. Now I'm going to add a colon and a space. Now one thing you could do here, there are two options. You could add a comma, or you can add a plus sign. So the comma, let me just finish this out, word count. So we can add our variable here since it is we can add a variable here. So the difference between the comma and the comma adds a space automatically. So you could, if you added this space, by adding a comma, you would get double space after the colon and then word count. If you added a plus sign, there's no space, it just joins them together. So this would just be, there would be no gap between the colon and the word count, and if you want double, you do double space. So I like using comma, it's nice. And there is another way you could do this. This is more formatting, so you could type F for format, and then you could take this whole string, put it in here, and then instead of having a comma and everything, you add the curly brackets, and then you say word count. So if you're doing multiple variables that you need to, alternate in the string, you could use the formatting and it's just a lot easier. But for our case, the first one works just fine, but you could use either. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and run this. So we're going to enter a string, hello world. Here are the number of words in your string. 1. Hello world. You see what I see? There are 2 words there, not just 1. So do you know what's happening here? What's happening is we count this 1 space, and that's 1 word. But I didn't add a space here, so it just forgets about this word. So, and this is going to be consistent. So if we run it again, we could type, hi, I am integer number. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4 words, but it's going to give me 3 because there's no space at the end. So since this is so common and it happens every time, we could say word count plus equal to 1 outside of the loop. So now we're adding outside. So I'm going to clear really quickly. And now we can type in again. So I can run our function or our file, and then we can say hello world again, and we get 2 words. And if you want another example, please subscribe. Oh, I need to run the thing. Okay, please subscribe. Speaking of subscribing, please do subscribe. It really encourages me to continue making videos for you guys, and it just helps me out. Helps me out a lot. So please do consider subscribing. But moving on, there are 3 words. 1, 2, and the smiley face acts like a word. So we have 3. And there you go. That is a working word counter. And this should help you understand we get printing. You know how to print. You know how to print variables and strings together. And you know how to take user input. And this is also a for loop if you didn't know. Variable. It's all this stuff. Alright. Now we're going to move on to create a number guessing game, which is slightly more complex if you want it to be. Let's get into it. Okay, so we can start off by importing the random module by using import random. And this module basically helps you generate random numbers using various functions. We're going to be using one specific function, which I'll show you in a moment. But let's start off by asking the user a couple of questions. So first we need the range of numbers. So range of numbers is going to be equal to the input, and we can ask them what would you like the range of numbers to be. And then we need to tell them to enter a number, or actually enter an integer. We want it to be a solid number, and then of course you leave a space. And then we want to check how many tries they want. So tries left is going to be equal to input. How many tries would you like? Leave a space. So of course we want them to choose what the range is. We want them to choose how many tries to have. And of course this lets you choose. This helps you decide the difficulty level of the game, which could be no difficulty if you have more tries than the range of numbers. But anyway, that's up to the user. The next thing we want to do is generate our number using the random number generator. So my number, which is the computer's number, is going to be random.randint. And here we're going to set 0 as a starting point, and b is going to be the range of numbers. So what just happened here? So we have our random module. You can see you got this stuff. And then a function inside the random module class is randint, which you can see returns an integer and taking an a and b both as integers. And of course it will generate a random one. So that's how that's going to work. But you notice something weird? It takes in an integer and an integer. 0 is an integer. Is the range of numbers an integer? We're asking in the string format, and the answer is always going to be in the string format. So you must make sure you convert everything to an integer. So the range of numbers is going to be a string, so we need to set it to an integer. And we can easily convert it by using this integer keyword. and it basically converts. So you can see come on, convert a number or string to an integer. So we can do that, and then tries left is also going to be integer of tries left. So now we can add or subtract two tries left or range of numbers, not that we need to, or we can loop through it, or we could check for equality. It's just easier that way. Great, so now we have our number, and one thing I'm going to add right here is telling the user that 0 is a part of the range. So we can tell them the range of numbers is from 0 to range of numbers. Just letting them know that, hey, 0 is a number and you can guess it, and it might be right. Great, so now we have to go through a for loop. So for I in range, tries left. So what just happened here? Well, we have I, which is the number of tries left. I don't think we need to use it, but it's there because we need one. And then range is helping us loop through tries left and go through each number. So we're going to create our guess. So guess is going to be equal to input guess my number, because we need to ask for guess. Now we're going to create our simple if statement. So if number is equal, so equality, we're checking for equality, to guess, then we want the user to win. This is going to be my number. Now how do we do that? Well, if we come back up here, we can create a user win boolean. I'm going to set to false. So when we do that, now we can set user win to true. And then I'm going to break out of this loop by using the break keyword. But do you notice something wrong that's going to happen about this? I want you to think about what's going on here. What's guess type? Like, what is guess's type? Integer, string, boolean, and then what is my number's type? And can we make them equal to each other? I don't think so, because my number is an integer because this returns an integer. And like I said, the input is always the answer is always going to be a string. So guess is a string, and we can't check if my number if an integer is equal to a string. So we have an integer number, which is 1, and a string that's an integer, which is also 1. They're not going to be the same. So how do we do this? Well, we convert it on the spot to set guess equal to an integer. Great. So now that we got all of that done, we can come out here, because once we break, we're outside. Or we loop through everything and we're still outside. So we can check if user win, and we're first going to check if the user won or not. So this is we have 3 ways to check this. If user win is equal to true, that's a valid argument. Or you could say if user win is true, that depends on your Python version, but this is also another valid argument. Or you could just say if user win, because user win is a boolean, which means it's either true or false. And we're saying if true or if false, which is, if you think about it this way, which is a valid argument. So we could say if user win, and that means if true. So if user win is true, we want to print out good job and give them a smiley face. Otherwise, so else, you're saying user win is false. Else we could print out better luck next time. My number was, now we can tell them the number, and that's going to be my number. And I don't want to, we already need 1 space. Okay, so that is how this works. Let's go ahead, hit run. We covered everything. Alright, so for the sake of this, I'm just going to enter 3. And I'm going to give myself 3 tries. So 0 to 3. Let's see here. 1, 3, 0. Better luck next time. My number was 2, so I got that wrong. And that's to demonstrate what happens if you get it wrong. Now we could try again. Actually, I'm going to clear. Now we could try again. And this time I can cheat by saying we have a range of 3, but I get 10 tries. So now I get to choose, and I get to demonstrate what happens when the user wins. You just go 0, 1, oh, and I won. So good job. And you know that the number was 1. So that is how this game works. And what I mentioned earlier was you could make this more complicated if you want by giving the user clues every time they guessed a number. So you could say, hey, my number is 5 is like, this is hot, this is cold. My number is a decimal. My number, it's a multiple of 5. My number is a multiple of 2. And those are things that can make this game a bit more fun. But for the sake of demonstrating all of this, this is good enough. And we're going to move on to a temperature converter from Fahrenheit to Celsius. Alright, so to make a temperature converter, we're going to need to make use of 2 equations, from Fahrenheit to Celsius and Celsius to Fahrenheit. But first, we need to ask the user what they want to convert from. So we can ask them, let's see, F or C, so Fahrenheit or Celsius, is equal to input of press 1 for Fahrenheit to Celsius, or press 2 for Celsius to Fahrenheit. And I can add a colon in space. So now we have that, and we need to make them an integer. So I'm going to now do the lazy thing and just make it an integer on the spot. Now that you know what you're doing, you can do that. So after that, we're going to need to check. So if F or C is equal to 1, then we're converting from Fahrenheit to Celsius. So the equation for that is going to be, of course, degrees minus 32, all in parentheses, multiplied by 5 over 9 as a fraction. But before we do that, we need to ask for degrees. Okay, what am I doing? Okay, input, enter the degrees in Fahrenheit. And then we can get the result. Oh, need a colon, space. We can get our result as degrees, all in parentheses, degrees minus 32 times 5 divided by 9. So you can see here that it's a fraction. I just used the division because this fraction is dividing. Put in parentheses, and that basically acts like a proper fraction. And we have the multiplication operator, and then degrees minus 32, it's in parentheses. So that's going to get us the result for for Fahrenheit to Celsius. Now we can copy the same thing, because now we need to make the converse. So else, we need to convert from Celsius to Fahrenheit. So I copied and pasted that because we just changed the F to C. And the equation for Celsius to Fahrenheit is degrees times 9 over 5, all in parentheses, plus 32. So we could do degrees times 9 divided by 5, change all of that to plus 32. And there you go. Now in the end, we just have to print out your result is colon result. But there's a problem here. I hope you noticed. You can tell, again, the input is in a string, and we're trying to add, subtract, do all sorts of math stuff to it, and strings and integers can't really work that way. So we need to convert it to an integer. Again, I'm going to do it on the spot. You could do it separately if you'd like. Whoops. There you go. So now everything should work. Go ahead and run this. Okay, let's press 1 and enter 72. Okay, so we entered in 72 for Fahrenheit and we get 22.2 repeated. We can go ahead and check that really quickly. So if we come over here, I have 72 degrees Fahrenheit. That is equal to 22.2222 repeated Celsius. So that is correct. Great. Now let's check our Celsius conversion. So we can run our file again. This time we press 2. And let's enter in, let's see here, 56 degrees in Celsius, and we get 132.8 in Fahrenheit. So we can go ahead, let's go ahead and check that. Put in 56 degrees Celsius to Fahrenheit, and we get 132.8. Awesome. Wow, this really works. So coming back over here, back on Earth, we can tell that this works pretty well. The only thing I can see a problem occurring in is floats. So that's another type of, well, it's another type in general, where it's the input is an integer. Sorry, not an integer. A floating point is a decimal. So 132.8 is a float, but a floating point they call it, and 56 is an integer. But for the sake of keeping it simple and concise, I'm going to leave it as is. Just don't enter like 2.5 or something, because that's going to be weird. All right. So yeah, that is the temperature converter. So there you go. You have 3 very basic mini Python projects that you should be able to do as a beginner. I really hope this video taught you something, and please, please, please do consider subscribing. It really, really helps me out. It's just one click. Just do it. And I will catch you in the next one.